Hello, this is my review of Alex O'Connor talking to Peter Singer about animal ethics and charity. So I knew something about Peter Singer already. I understood that he'd written books from the 70s advocating for animal rights, etc., and that he'd inspired the vegan movement, and he was campaigning for animal rights, and what he would like to see eventually is an abolition of animal exploitation. So just coming to the start of the conversation, Alex asked Peter Singer whether he was satisfied with the progress that had been made since he wrote his books in the 70s. Singer said that there had been progress, but that there was significant issues, and he cited some progress. For example, he said that in Britain in the 70s you could count vegans in the tens, 20s, or even hundreds, or maybe thousands at the most, and now there were 1.2 million vegans in the UK. He made this point, and personally I thought about the population growth in the UK. It's come from 55 million in the 70s to about 66 million now. So if there were, let's say there were 0 vegans in the 70s in the UK, now there are 1.2 million. Let's say a million, just to round it down. There are a million vegans in the UK now, but we've got 66 million. We have a population increase of 11 million, which means that net there are 10 million more non-vegans in the UK than in the 70s. So, okay, there have been increase in the number of vegans, but population growth has obliterated many times over that progress, if you can, and looking at the figures for meat production in the world, this brings me to what Peter Singer said about that there were countries in the 70s, 60s and 70s that were predominantly arable farming, crops, etc., China and other countries, where they've seen an explosion in factory farming and beef production. I've got a chart here that I took from a reputable website, so I've got no reason to believe that these figures are incorrect. Let's have a look at them now. There you can see global meat production 1961 to 2021 divided by continents. So we can see that let's take Europe, where obviously, as Singer said, there have been a lot of improvements in Europe for animal rights, etc., but nowhere else, more or less. But in terms of meat production, we can see that with Europe, it's gone from, shall we say, in the mid-70s, about 40 million tons, and it's currently at about 65 million tons. There's an increase there, but the biggest increase we can see is in Asia, which would obviously include China, and in the mid 70s it's gone from, shall we say, 25 million tons to touching 150 million tons of meat production per year, which is an absolutely monumental increase. And really, if you look at all the continents, South America, Brazil, I think Brazil and China are the two biggest beef producers in the world, and beef production has absolutely skyrocketed. On the basis of these figures, it looks to me like the campaign to push back on animal exploitation has utterly failed. There is a tide of animal exploitation which looks unstoppable based on these figures, and that the vegan restaurants we see, the vegan movement, the influencers and the trenders, etc., are fighting an absolute tidal wave of animal exploitation. I don't see any reason for optimism based on this. Of course, conditions have improved in Europe and the UK, as Singer said, and in some states in America, but in most states in America, the legislation is pitiful, and animals are still horribly exploited. Small cages for hens where they can't turn around, pigs, etc. Only really in Europe has it improved, maybe Oceania, Australia, New Zealand. But in the rest of the world, it's as bad or worse than it ever was. And in terms of sheer bulk, of course, the population of the world has doubled since the 70s. So one would expect that meat production would have at least doubled. But I mean, in Asia, it's gone up by 5 times. It's even, you know, I don't see any evidence on the basis of that people are switching to plant-based diets. It seems to be going the other way. But obviously, if I've misinterpreted these figures, and if I'm wrong, and that's one of the reasons I made this video, because I'm interpreting the discussion and the issues, and you know, if I've missed something, I like to be told, I like to be informed, so I could then go and check it out myself, because I can't know everything. Right, so let's just continue then with the conversation. So now Singer was saying that his own position is that he's a Flexitarian. So that means, this is something that Alex asked to clarify. Now we know that Alex was not a Flexitarian. We know that he was a vegan. He said he was a vegan, and I presume what that means is that he was not eating any animal products or any foods that came from animal products, like eggs and chickens. Sorry, eggs and milk, dairy products, etc. And that he was not wearing leather shoes, etc. So, as for Singer, I did assume that he was a vegan, and it did come as a surprise to me when he said that he does occasionally eat meat products, and he would eat, for example, shellfish such as oysters, because he doesn't believe that they've got the sentience whereby they feel pain. So he doesn't see any problem eating oysters, for example. He also wouldn't see a problem if he was on an airplane. He'd booked a vegan meal. The vegan meals had not been loaded on by the caterers, so only non-vegan meals were available. It was put in front of him. He said that he would eat it because, in his view, it would be a greater evil to let it go to waste. Yeah, and Alex said he also knows vegans who would also eat meat if the alternative was letting it go to waste. I found this quite curious in a way, that, for example, if a vegan went out for dinner with a non-vegan, and the non-vegan, let's imagine that if you've been to a Turkish restaurant and you order, what do you call it, char-grilled meat, kebab, whatever, shoshlik, bits of lamb, char-grilled lamb and chicken, comes on a skewer, it comes on a kind of triangular type arrangement. Personally, I love it. I love that. You know, it's nice. One of my favorite dishes. If I go to a Turkish restaurant, that's all I ever order. So if you're sitting there, I can't imagine that a vegan would want to do that particularly and sit and watch some carnivore eat that kind of meal. But let's say that that was the case, and the person who'd ordered that kebab couldn't finish it, and there was lots of food left over. This vegan was a vegan for ethical reasons, or it's not so much that the vegan was disgusted in meat or anything, might well eat that because otherwise it's just going to go to waste. I found that quite sort of bizarre in a way, and that probably would be very rare for that to happen. But in Singer's worldview, it seems to me that he would actually, if it was going to go to waste, he would eat it. Now, in terms of going to waste, that sort of creates quite a big grey area. If it's okay ethically to eat something that would otherwise go to waste, I'd like to tell you that in the UK, £200 million worth of groceries are discarded by supermarkets because they're out of date. And a very high proportion of those are meat products like chickens, poultry, you know, beef, etc., are discarded and thrown away because they perish beyond the sell-by date. And I mean, I could easily make the argument that, for example, if I buy a chicken, particularly as I do, I go into the supermarket late at night, I look for the bargains before they close, and I have bought, for example, a chicken which is going to be discarded. It's the last day it can be sold, and it's been reduced in price by 50%. Based on Singer's worldview, me buying that chicken and eating it is an ethical choice, because otherwise it would go to waste, it would be discarded. But I can imagine that the bulk of vegans would believe that I'd made an unethical choice. but not for Singer. If it's going to waste, it's okay to eat it, whatever it is. So where are we? Yeah, so Singer, I believe that he kind of relies on utilitarianism. Excuse me. So if the total good, if you've got more good than suffering, then the net result is good. So for example, if you raise a lamb that has a good happy life, it's allowed to graze, it's allowed to be with its mother, etc., and suckle on its mother, and it's slaughtered at the end with zero pain. He would not call that immoral. He would not say that that's immoral. So what he's specifically against is the suffering of the animals. Now, Alex, to his credit, I suppose, latched onto this and said, well, you could then, if we're not going to go down the speciesist route, what's wrong then with taking humans, raising humans, and rearing them for maybe a particular type of meat that's on their body, which is prized as a delicacy. Raising those humans particularly for that purpose, giving them a happy life, not telling them what's going to happen to them, and killing them painlessly at the end. Why is that not the same as what you've just described for animals? And Singer said, well, you've just brought up a hypothetical there, which is something that which we don't see in the world, and our intuitions would say that that's a bad thing. But he admitted that he could not say, although it goes against our intuition that it could be called moral, or at least it could not be said to be immoral. It goes against our intuitions, but the intuitions could not always be relied upon to resolve certain ethical dilemmas. And that, notwithstanding that it is an unlikely hypothetical example brought up by Alex as a kind of reductio ad absurdum to show where Singer's argument leads, he could not say that the scenario that Alex had illustrated was an immoral one, although he felt compelled to be against it, as most people would. Alex pointed out that in terms of what Singer's been doing, rather than trying to get animal exploitation abolished, he's been campaigning for better conditions for animals in factory farming, for example, or hen houses. Doesn't this in a way condone animal farming and animal exploitation, in the same way that, going back to the 1700s, when the British and when the Americans were transporting slaves from Africa, there was a lot of campaigning going on to improve conditions of slaves on ships, when really what they should have been doing was going for abolition, which did not come until later on. Singer countered this by saying, well, there's a difference, because whereas with slavery, even then, it was not a universally accepted thing. There were only certain countries that were doing it, and around the world it was not universally accepted at all. But in the world that we live in today, and has been the case for thousands of years, animal exploitation is universally accepted in every single country. Well, nearly every single country accepts that animal exploitation is acceptable. And this is why it's better to fight for conditions for animals where they're being exploited, rather than go for the unrealistic goal of trying to abolish animal exploitation. So personally speaking, yeah, I completely sort of agree with him there, that just because you can't put an end to animal exploitation doesn't mean to say that it's acceptable to keep them in any kind of terrible conditions, and that some improvements in reducing their suffering is better than no improvement at all. So I absolutely can see where he's coming from there. Let's just see what else was said. Yeah, so I must say I was surprised that Singer went for these kind of grey areas, and I expected him to be a lot more dogmatic. So it surprised me, and in a way, kind of pleased me that he was not so. Particularly because, as a non-vegan myself, but one who tries to reduce the number of unethical choices that I'm making, as much as I feel is sort of reasonably possible. I feel that I'm not really that far from where sort of Peter Singer is at, and probably, most people who pay any attention to these ethical issues and also the environment, etc., the impact of factory farming on the environment. A lot of us who are concerned about that are aware that the farming of red meat is responsible for an absolutely monumental amount of CO2 which is going into the atmosphere, and consequently it's quite rare for me to make that choice to eat those types of products. So I tend, personally speaking, I mainly go for fish and poultry, which I suppose for vegans would be bad, but aligning myself with the way that Peter Singer does things, that I can't do everything, but that doesn't mean to say that I shouldn't do anything, which I think is not quite a reasonable sort of position. And if Alex is saying that he knows vegans who will not let certain foods go to waste, even if they're going against their veganism, me as a non-vegan and other non-vegans are probably ethically not massively different. If you take veganism to its limits in terms of its the exploitation of animals for the benefit of human beings, if you want to take that to its limit, then there are a lot of vegans out there with pets, for example, who are exploiting their pets for their own, for their own benefit. And it's debatable whether, in a puritanical sense, they are also vegans. But they would claim that they are. They would claim that they're, they're looking after the animals, giving them a home, etc. But then again, the primary purpose of having a pet is for the human. It's not for the pet. So, in that sense, it does rank as exploitation of an animal. Alex moved on to charity issues. So yeah, with charity, he pointed out that he personally indulges in things like drinking cocktails, and maybe rather than doing that, he should send the money to charity. It would do a lot much better there than him enjoying his cocktails. Singer's point on this was that he would not condemn anybody who, on the whole, made ethical choices to occasionally indulge in something that they enjoy, as he admitted to doing so himself, that he contributes more than his fair share to charity, but he feels he could do more, that he indulges in certain things, and he could send that money to charity himself. So he said that for him, making ethical choices is not about pointing the finger at others. It's about thinking about what you're doing. And of course, I agree with that. I never point my fingers at others, or at least I try not to. I suppose it irritates me when I see people dropping litter and I'm pointing my fingers and at people that drop litter. But if I suppose for me, pointing the finger at somebody who's dropping litter is not much good unless I'm personally going to pick that litter up myself, which I have done on occasions. So yeah, it's not about finger pointing. It's about thinking about what you're doing. So I agree with him there, because let's face it, online it's very easy to point fingers. And if you go onto certain videos where vegans and non-vegans are arguing, there's finger pointing and condemnation going on all the time. Yeah, Singer did point out, for example, that with crop production, no, I think Alex said that, just coming back now to crop production, that vegans are not thinking about the animals that are having to be killed to protect crops. So we've got you know, we've got snails and slugs which typically are getting at root vegetables and destroying them, and it's necessary to put stuff into the soil to kill these. And I know that because I used to grow potatoes. I never did put stuff into the soil because I tried to grow organic, but I must say that half of the potatoes we used to grow were absolutely massacred by snails and slugs. But those have got to be killed in organic farming. Those snails and slugs have got to be killed. Is there any sentience? Can they feel pain? Singer doesn't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. So, but he goes against puritanical insistence, and that he would say that for any person who's trying to make ethical choices, you're not necessarily a bad person because you ate an animal product, and that you should look at the overall picture in terms of what you're doing. That's about it, really. That more or less sort of sums up the conversation. But what I got from it on the whole was, and what really surprised me, was the flexibility of Singer. I thought he was a pure vegan. He's not, and and yet he encourages veganism. So it's kind of, I was thinking it's kind of, you know, he's not sort of wholly practicing what he preaches, but he did present an apologist case for his own Flexitarian stance, which I thought was quite clear the way he put it over. What really surprised me was that at the end, Alex said, well, thank you, Dr. Singer, for coming on. It's been a pleasure, as always, to talk to you. I have to say that on many points you made, I remain unconvinced. I thought that was absolutely hilarious. Well, if you watched the video, can you let me know where Alex was unconvinced? I didn't get that Alex was unconvinced about anything. I didn't see that any conflict between them. There was this thing about the humans being reared in a painless way and a painless death. Alex presented that scenario to critique Singer's, his position on, if you could bring up meat with no suffering, it would be okay to have it. And I mean, apart from that, but he was sort of presenting that as a reductio ad absurdum to expose a flaw in the argument. But it didn't seem to me that necessarily Alex disagreed with that, because after all, Alex is also not a vegan. He's at best a flexitarian, or just not, just an omnivore. So I didn't really get where Alex disagreed with Singer on any single point. So it was hilarious to hear him say, I remain unconvinced. Where? I didn't see it. I didn't get that conflict. That's what I was hoping for. I was hoping for some conflict, because without conflict in these online podcasts, where's the fire? Where's the interest? I didn't get it. It wasn't there. So in that sense, I was disappointed. But I was glad I watched it, because I learned a lot about Singer's position. Okay, thanks a lot for watching, and I look forward to your comments on my video. Bye for now.